and welcome back to my book defacing mini-series where I will be offering you a comprehensive explanation into how I deface my books. So this video is covering what I believe to be the most important part of the process, and that is the planning of, how you're going to deface your book. Because, before you actually get to the painting and, the drawing on your book, you want to have a really good idea of what you're doing. Otherwise, you're not going to be confident in it, and then you're going to be more likely to mess up, and then it's gonna snowball from there, and it's probably gonna suck. So this part is, like I said, very important. So before I even get into the whole brainstorming of the actual design itself, there are a number of things that I like to consider before getting into it. The first thing I tend to consider, of course, is going to be oh, what book is it? Because that in and of itself is going to determine what kind of style you might be thinking of doing, what kind of design is going to fit with it. But also, you're going to want to look at the book itself, the actual physical book, because to me, that automatically determines what I even can do. So I mean, as you've seen, most of the books that I've defaced so far are just completely solid black, and that's because those offer the most freedom, because you can just paint all over those and have no problems. But that is not going to be the case for a lot of books, and I haven't really ventured into defacing books that aren't just solid black all that much. I've done one. There's a lot of different kinds of books physically out there that you might run into, and you can still deface those. Just what they look like and how they are initially is something that you're probably going to want to consider before you get into your designing. So I'm going to be showing you some quick examples of the different kind of books that you might come across and how that might impact your planning process. So obviously the first kind of book that you'll likely run into is just the solid, basic, black, plain book. So this is my new copy that I got of A Court of Frost and Starlight. I had a defaced copy. I gave it to my friend because this is a special edition one that I wanted. So I'm gonna deface this one again. These are really great because they're essentially a blank canvas. You can do whatever you want on these because, they're just black, a solid color, everyone has plain black books. There's nothing thrilling about that. You can paint all over this and it'll be awesome. Or you can use gel pens. You can do whatever the heck you want. That's why I really love defacing these, and that's why I love that, my favorite series just so happens to have, completely black, plain covers. If this is your first venture into book defacing, get yourself one of these. If you're these are gonna be good practice. And I also recommend maybe getting an older beat up copy of something from a secondhand store or off a bargain rack at a Books A Million or something like that, because then you're not gonna be spending that much money just to possibly mess up. But the good thing about these is if you do mess up on them, and especially if you're painting, you can just paint right over them. I messed up so many times on my copy of A Court of Thorns and Roses when I first did it. I can't tell you. I think I painted over it twice because I was just not satisfied. And now look at it. It looks beautiful. And you wouldn't even be able to tell. Definitely, beginners, start with these. It's gonna take a lot of the stress out of it, knowing that it's okay to mess up. I prefer these. I love these. So the next kind of book that you will most likely run into is something like this. And it is a book that is solid still, like the black books, but it's an odd color, So this is Shadow and Bone. This is an interesting one. Actually, this entire series is interesting to me because I got these for Christmas, and I was really excited to see that, they have this cool color, and you don't want to paint over this. At least I don't. You can. Don't get me wrong. You absolutely can. But it's gonna make it a bit more difficult, I think, just because you have to deal with the spine, which has all of this leafing on it, and then it's difficult to paint around that, without it causes problems essentially. Personally, I would not paint these, at least not entirely like I do with Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses and stuff like that. I would likely opt for gel pens on this one. And this whole series is kind of weird to me because this is the first one, and as you can see, it's just yellow. But then you get the second one, and suddenly there's a stamp on it. I cannot express how much I hate these stamps. I hate them, okay? If you're gonna put a stamp on it, I would prefer that you put it, you at least put some kind of leafing in it, make it look aesthetically pleasing. Like, do you know how hard this is for me to deal with when I'm thinking about defacing? Like, it is, because I have to figure out how to make, like, somehow fill it in and make it look natural and then incorporate it into my whole design. So now, the problem I'm gonna run in with these when I do actually get to defacing them is going to be, this one has a stamp, this one does not. Ruin and Rising has a stamp on it too, but again, this one doesn't. So not only am I going to have to somehow incorporate this into the designs of the last two books, because this is a series, which is another thing you're gonna wanna consider before you get into the whole planning process, because it's a series, and I want to probably have the styles kind of look consistent across all three books, I'm probably gonna have to mimic this stamp on this book, because, you know, otherwise it's gonna look weird. And I want them to, like, you want to be able to set them next to each other and have it look like, oh yes, this is book 1, book 2, book 3, and not have this one be the odd one out because it doesn't have a stamp. So, working with stamps, especially on books like this is a special case, because if this was just a black book, I have a way of working around that. That's something I'm gonna get into later. But I mean, because it's on this, it's neat. It's a neat colored book. It's green, it's cool, but it's got a stamp on it. I hate stamps. So the next kind of book that I have an example of is this. This is Fire and Heist. As you can see, it's different colored, but it also has a different colored spine. I think this offers some interesting opportunities to maybe do some cool, like, design work on the spine maybe. But again, this isn't one I would probably take the paints to, just because if you mess up, then you would have to, like, paint over it, and I don't know. It's easier to just, on these kinds of books, to just use gel pens, and that's my personal opinion. You can do what you want. I should probably say that. You can do whatever the heck you want with your books. This is just my thinking on it. Yeah, I would not paint on this kind of book. I would want to preserve the uniqueness, I think, of the different colored spine and the different colored book, and somehow work around all that. So yeah, if you're looking to, like, deface, say, Harry Potter, you're gonna run into this problem, because every Harry Potter book has, at least every one that I've seen, the traditional ones with, like, the normal covers, you know, the original versions of them, they all have these spines. So, something to consider. So the next kind of books I'm going to be showing you are going to be some more variations of books with stamps. So these are different because both of these books are black and they have some stamp work on it, and they also both have leafing in them, which is something that I prefer to have in stamps if I'm going to try and work with it. But also this is these are just going to be some good examples of stamps that I think you could do away with if you wanted to. So the first book that I have here is Kingdom of Ash. Honestly, this stamp, the sword is neat. Sarah J. Maas's signature is not something that I would really want stamped on my book. And as you have probably seen if you've watched any of my Throne of Glass defacing time lapses, I have a whole design plan, like a design scheme that I'm following for each of those books. And this does not fit with that at all. So there will be no incorporating her signature and the sword into the design. Like, it's not gonna work. It's not gonna look right. So in this particular case, I am going to be using a method to get rid of the stamp, and this is gonna be ideal because it's not that big and it'll be easily covered, I think, because you got really thin lines. Things get a little bit more difficult when the stamp is bigger. On this book, you have another stamp with some leafing in it, and it's a lot more intricate, it's bigger, it's gonna be harder to cover. Can you still cover it? Yes, but it'll be hard, and honestly, why would you want to? I think it looks neat. I love the way that this looks. This is the Wicked King, by the way. This would be a case in which I probably would not do anything on the front cover. I would only deface the back. And I have done that on one book. I did that for Children of Blood and Bone. Time lapse is on my channel if you're interested in checking that out. Once again, yeah, I didn't use paints. I wouldn't use paint on something like this probably, mostly for fear of potentially getting it on the leafing or on the cover somewhere. I use the gel pens. So if there's ever a situation in which I look at the book and I'm like, I'm kind of worried about messing up a part of it with paint, most likely I'm gonna opt for gel pens instead. The last kind of book that I'm gonna show you is one that I don't see many of, but it's something that, you know, I do want to deface this book, but it's a bit, it poses an interesting challenge, I think, because it's different from all the books that I've shown you before in a very different way. And that's the best way I can really describe it. This is Girls of Paper and Fire. I got this in a Fairy Loot subscription box, so it is a special edition signed by the author. It's got cool sprayed edges, which is another thing that I'm actually going to be talking about, is sprayed edges and how you can do that if that's something you want to do. So because it's a special edition, I've looked at the copies available at the bookstore and they're different than this one. And so this is interesting. I've never run into a book quite like this, I don't think. At first glance, it kind of looks like just a normal black book, right? So this is Court of Frost and Starlight, this is Girls of Paper and Fire. But they're actually different in texture. So this has the papery texture that you typically associate with hardcover books. This one, it has, like, it's really smooth, and it has, like, it's slightly ridged. I don't know if you can see it. Probably not. This camera is not very good. So it's very smooth, almost like sleek, but it has like a bumpy texture to it. This is one that I haven't really experimented with it. I'm kind of hesitant to deface it. If I do, because it has this texture, I'm probably not going to be using gel pens on it at all, just because when you do the gel pens on like a ridged surface, you can, like, it doesn't get in all the crevices. So if you have an oddly textured book like this, and you would like to deface it, definitely go for paint, because the paint is more liquidy and fluid. It's going to fill in all those really tiny bumps that you're just not going to be able to get the gel pens to fill in as well. So yeah, if you have something like this, steer clear of gel pens. It's probably not going to work. I mean, you could try it if you want, but I haven't tried it and I don't think it's gonna work. Totally up to you, however you want to do it. Going from, you know, once you have your book and you've looked at it and you've thought about what kind of book it is, then you're probably gonna start thinking about designs. And so my design process likely is going to differ from everybody who is watching this, because everyone has their own creative process. So like I've been saying, don't take anything that I'm saying as like a rule, like, oh, this is how you have to do it to get these results. Like, no, these are not tutorials. These videos are really just going to show how I do it personally, and you can adapt any of this any way you like. It doesn't really matter. But when I first start thinking about designs, well, the first thing I'm thinking is like inspiration. Like, what do I want to do? And so typically I draw inspiration from the books themselves, which is the most obvious source of inspiration you could go to. So for me, I'll usually think about like iconic scenes or locations or symbols or visuals or anything really that kind of represents that book. Once I consider that, then I'll think, okay, well, thinking back to what kind of book it is, like, is it just plain old black? Is it an odd color? Am I going to be using paints? Am I going to be using gel pens? Once I consider that, then I can think about some of the ideas that I've come up with and maybe start formulating exactly how I can put those on the book. And sometimes some will work and sometimes they won't. It all just kind of depends. So for A Court of Thorns and Roses, I knew the book was black, and I had kind of compiled a list of things. So for the first book, I was thinking, okay, roses, obviously, put that on the list. I thought, what's an iconic scene from the first book? There's the scene where, in the very beginning, where she kills the wolf, and that sets everything into motion. Put that on my list. But then I was also, because it's part of a series, which is something I do recommend you consider if you're going to deface the first book in a series, think, are you going to deface the others? And maybe kind of try and center your designs around like the series, make them adaptable so you can change them for each book cover. That's something you can do. You don't have to. So I thought, you know, Court of Thorns and Roses is currently a 4-book series, gonna be a 6-book series by the end of it, if I'm not mistaken. I thought, you know, well, overall for the whole series, night is a big theme, you know, because night court, all that stuff. So I was like, well, what if I had like a starry night sky and then did silhouettes and, you know, and this is again why I really love black books, because like this was completely doable. I could totally do this. That's kind of how that all came to be. So like once I kind of got the idea, the next step that I highly recommend you follow is to put it all on paper. or on Photoshop, or just draw it all out. Plan it. Like, plan exactly what it is you want to do. Don't just go straight to the book and start doing it, because then you're gonna mess up, and no one wants that. Messing up is not, it's not a fun time, because then you kind of panic and you're like, oh god, I've just completely messed up my book, and it's not a fun experience. Personally, I like to use Photoshop for this. Here is an example of what my Photoshopped guide image looks like. Really, I just like to use Photoshop because it allows me to kind of look at everything layer by layer, and this also kind of helps with planning like the order in which you paint certain things. So that's just something to consider. If you don't have Photoshop, if you're not proficient in Photoshop, it can be very hard to use. Then of course there are other kinds of softwares. I'm sorry I don't have examples of other softwares that you can use, but I know they exist. Ultimately, you don't need it. If you don't want to use that, you can just draw it out. But seriously, just have some kind of plan. Just have something to go on. Don't just try and spontaneously do this, because, you know, as it is, people who start book defacing are going to be nervous, and that's just the way it is. So once you have your guide image, this next step again is optional. If you're completely confident in your artistic abilities, then that's great. You might not feel the need to do this, but what I actually like to do for some of the more complicated aspects of the designs that I do is I like to make cardstock cutouts of those particular shapes in order to make sure that they stay proportional with how I have them drawn out. I will trace it and then I will cut it out, and I will be using that when I actually get to the defacing of the book, because the thing is, you're probably going to be using pencil to sort of sketch out the design. You've probably seen it in the defacing videos. You can see the outlines of the pencils, because I mean, you want to be sure of what you're doing. You don't want to just like paint free-handed, unless you're really good at that, in which case have at it, but I am not. So the thing about putting pencil on the kinds of paints that I use is that it can be a bit difficult to get pencil off, I have found, which I think is interesting. And of course, you know, you don't want to be sitting there like scrubbing it with like a wet paper towel, potentially messing up the whole design. So yeah, I like to be more sure of it before I actually put, you know, like the shape of it. And so by having the cardstock cut out, not only does that help keep everything proportional, but it also allows you to kind of move it around and see exactly where that particular shape is going to go. And I think that's just really helpful. You don't have to do that. I like to do that just to be more, it gives me more confidence when I do it. And I think for beginners especially, that would probably help you out some too. So that's the gist, I think, of my whole planning process. So like I said in the introductory video, the following videos are going to be about other various steps in the process. The next video specifically is going to be focusing on the kinds of materials that I use, which is something I am asked about a lot. Everyone wants to know what I've been using. And that is going to be the video for you if that's what you have questions about. So if you would like to know about the material that I use, go ahead, click on to the next video, and thanks for watching, and happy book defacing!